We know there's science and we know there's philosophy. But did you know that there's a philosophy of science? These are the rules and philosophical conceptual guidelines which scientists follow in order for what we do to qualify as science. This includes things like the scientific method, hypothesis testing, and really a lot of wonderful information we should go over in depth. I have a book by Kay Hall that is called Rules and Regulations of Science. It is in Spanish. It was written a little over 100 years ago, so I would need to translate it to share it with you, but that would be a great way to practice my Spanish and to go over that book. So it would be wrong to assume that scientists aren't interested in philosophy, and it would be fair to argue that if a scientist does not fully understand and abide by the philosophy of science and their practice of science, then we should call into question the validity of their work. And with that, I'm going to read another excerpt from Chomsky's A Case Against Skinner, 71. Skinner states that the task of a scientific analysis is to explain how the behavior of a person as a physical system is related to the conditions under which the human species evolved and the conditions under which the individual lives. Suppose that in fact the human brain operates by physical principles, now unknown, that provides for free choice, appropriate to situations, but only marginally affected by environmental contingencies. The task of scientific analysis is not, as Skinner believes, to demonstrate that the conditions to which he restricts his attention fully determine human behavior, but rather to discover whether, in fact, they do. This critique gets back to an earlier point that was made earlier in this essay about how you can't have a predetermined conclusion in science if you're really doing science. That violates the philosophy of science. This next excerpt, these are both from page 5, by the way, goes a little bit more in depth with some really specific and kind of odd beliefs that Skinner has about what science is and is not. Let me show you. In support of his belief that science will demonstrate that behavior is entirely a function of antecedent events, Skinner notes that physics advanced only when it, quote-unquote, stopped personifying things and attributing to them wills, impulses, feelings, purposes, and so on. Therefore, he concludes, the science of behavior will progress only when it stops personifying people and avoids reference to internal states. No doubt, physics advanced by rejecting the view that a rock's wish to fall is a factor in its behavior because, in fact, a rock has no such wish. For Skinner's argument to have any force, he must show that people have wills, impulses, feelings, purposes, and the like no more than rocks do. If people do differ from rocks in this respect, then a science of human behavior will have to take account of this fact. Go ahead and pause to read if you'd like to read the next paragraph. So Chomsky continues to go a little bit more in depth, talking about Skinner's specific ideas about there not being internal states to things, and his argument that Skinner's argument that science doesn't involve the investigation of inner states. And Chomsky goes on to demonstrate that for both science and engineering, it is the study of internal states that is really the focal point. For example, in an engineering problem, you're going to try to figure out, suppose it's a mechanism that's not working. The problem is to get the mechanism to work, you want to understand the internal process. So this is a fallacy. This is a fallacy that Skinner has in his beliefs about science that actually go against the grains of how we define science. So this is all back to my original point, which is that when we use animal behavior in cellular neuroscience, we are focused on understanding the internal state with the understanding that the behavior is what we can observe, whereas Skinner believed not only that there wasn't an internal state, but that science depended on neglecting the existence of an internal state, and this goes against how we define science. So we should definitely look more into behavioral science and how modern behavioral scientists have some have leaned into Skinner's beliefs and some have branched off and tried to correct some of these more troublesome things, and I'd like to go more in depth with that also. Now, I want to clarify that this is not to say that to be a scientist or for a person's scientific work to be valid, they must embody scientific philosophy in all areas of their life. In fact, that would be very unhealthy, and we could certainly go over some examples of what that might look like and it not being very healthy. One of the great things about science is that the philosophy of science, which we'll definitely go more in depth about in this course, allows for people to have any type of religious belief or no religious belief, and that is compatible with their science perspectives, but that doesn't mean that those beliefs can be mixed in with a science philosophy. One of the ways that this works is how, when we're doing science, we're able to keep that separate to a certain extent, and that gets into bias and to what extent can we limit it, and let's talk about that too.